Hey everyone, welcome to a Sun and Moon 2 Lost Thunder deck profile. Today we're going to be profiling the Cofagrigus Giratina deck that I've kind of just kept playing over the years. I was playing this deck back in 2018 and I'm still playing it now because it's so much fun to play. It's a really unique deck that I figured I'd cover. I'm not a big fan of covering decks that other people made, but I am a big fan of covering decks that I've either innovated or decks that I've changed. This is a current replacement just for the tabletop Friday videos, just because I do not have videos to upload right now. I had a few files get ruined because my camera has a very pervasive thing for showing the tripod. So all 4 of those videos were ruined because there's a tripod sticking out covering up like a quarter of the screen. So we're going to do a couple of deck profiles just to make up for that time that's lost, and we'll get back to regular scheduled retro tabletop content in maybe 1 or 2 weeks. So I apologize for that, but figured this is at least an interesting replacement. Get to talk about one of my favorite decks of all time. Let's start. Starting off, we have 4 copies of Yamask. Just gonna put them over here. This Yamask is not particularly special. 70 HP is notable because you do live a lot of hits, but other than that, it's got a horrible attack. It puts 1 damage counter on an opponent's Pokemon. It's something. I've had it matter before, but you're really not going to see that attack win you a lot of games. It's really, really mediocre. Essentially the bare minimum that you can get with an attack. 70 HP is nice. Weakness to Dark is horrible because of the prevalence of Zoroark, and that's ultimately why this deck doesn't succeed, because this deck has a lot of great matchups in the meta, to be honest. It just does horribly against Zoroark, which is why it was never truly a meta deck. Resistance fighting is key though on this card. Makes your Buzzwole matchup super free. Against Zoroark, you have a better chance than other Zoroark decks. Though Zoroark's also just probably one of the weaker Zoroark decks, so if you run into that, count your prayers. Then we have 4 copies of Cofagrigus. This is the main attacker in the deck. It's going to be attacking with its Spirit Juggling attack. I will have scans up on the screen so you can read the cards up close. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to show them in the light like this. Spirit Juggling is great. You do 10 plus 30 for each of your Pokemon that you discard from your bench. Ideally, you could discard 4 Pokemon from your bench, maybe 5 to win the game. If you're going to discard all of your Pokemon, you better be winning the game with that attack, but most of the time you're actually going to be discarding 3. And that's because we're going to be wanting to have a Yamask on the bench, your Cofagrigus in the active, and likely one other support Pokemon that we'll get to in a minute. What is the Pokemon we're mainly going to be discarding? Why, that is Giratina from Lost Thunder. We play 4 copies of Giratina from Lost Thunder with the incredible Distortion durability. Once during your turn, if it's in your discard pile, you may put it onto your bench, then put 1 damage counter on 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Because you get to play 4 of them, you can discard up to 4 of them. You can bring them back and put lots of bench damage on your opponent's Pokemon every single turn, and you just repeat the process with Spirit Juggling. Every single turn, just keep looping the Giratinas. You have infinite Pokemon to discard then, so you're not worried as much about resources for these Giratinas to discard. It does have an attack, Shadow Impact, that we can use. Does 130, put 4 damage counters on one of your Pokemon. We're not going to use that attack very often. If you're using that, you're probably in trouble, and I pray for you, because that game's probably not going to go too well. But it's there, so figure I would mention it. Then we have our support line that I was speaking of. We play a 1/1 Malamar line. We play the Inkay, which does have Hypnosis, which is pretty nice for a basic, but mainly it's just here to evolve into Malamar. Malamar's Psychic Recharge is a really good ability. Once during your turn, you may look at your discard pile, grab a Psychic Energy attached to one of your benched Pokemon. So, Cofagrigus has a 2 attack cost, and there's no really good way to get around that other than playing the very inconsistent Counter Energy, which I really didn't like in this deck. So we play Malamar. Malamar allows us to just continually chain the Cofagrigus, because we'll just have 1 in the active, 1 on the bench will get an energy from the Malamar, and then you attach the one next turn when it goes to the active, accelerate to the next one to the bench, and it just fulfills that loop. Do note that your Malamar is very prone to being gusted by the opponent, so we do play another strategy to keep our energy in play in this deck that we'll get to shortly, but having a 1/1 line is really nice. You can get it back super easily, and we play some more tricks to help the Malamar work out. Next up, we have 1 copy of Oricorio from Guardians Rising. This is the Hula Hoop dancing one. It has the ability Vital Dance. When you play it from your hand to your bench, you may search your deck for 2 basic energy and put them into your hand. Seems kind of underwhelming, but it's actually really good in this deck. This deck needs energy to be able to attack, because you're going to want to be attacking every single turn. If you whiff an attack with Cofagrigus, you're probably losing the game. So this is an instant out with your many search options, mainly Ultra Ball and Mysterious Treasure can search this out, to go and use it and search the deck for energies. And it's really good. We'll be talking about a card we'll reuse later, but you can just discard this and then reuse it later, and that's what makes it even better, because it's always an out to get you an energy, so you're never going to be whiffing your energies from the deck. Then we play one copy of Marshadow from Shining Legends. Marshadow from Shining Legends is great with its Let Loose ability. When you play from your hand into your bench, you shuffle your hand into your deck, and so does your opponent, and you draw 4 cards. So it's like a Judge effect if you play Judge in the modern era. This card's really good for disrupting your opponent, but it also just gives us consistent draw. Yes, you can break your opponent, that's good, but we don't want to really rely on that. What we're relying on is this card to get us out of a bind. If our hand is completely dead, we can Marshadow into new cards. And because we can search it out easily, and because we can recover it easily, it's going to be live the entire game. Next up, we play Tapu Lele promo. It is important that we have the Psychic one. There is one from Ultra Prism that's Fairy that does the same thing. We are playing the Psychic Tapu Lele. Has a 1 energy attack that's not bad. Psywave does 20 for each energy test your opponent's active. I have taken a KO with this before in a different deck, but you're not really going to rely on it. Same with the other attacks on these guys. You can use them, but you're not going to. So Tapu Lele is here for mainly its magical swap attack. Move any damage counters on your opponent's field around to their other Pokemon any way you like. So this is great for taking a finishing knockout. You're going to be putting a lot of damage on their field with Giratina, and sometimes it's not going to add up to the KOs you want, or sometimes your opponent's just going to put up a giant wall in the active, know you're out of Guzma, and just say, you can't get through this Pokemon. So what you can do is power up Tapu Lele with the effect of Malamar, bring it to the active spot, and win the game with Tapu Lele's magical swap, moving all of the damage from your opponent's Pokemon to that active Pokemon, taking the knockout. So it's really good, but it's also very difficult to use, so you don't want to rely on it overly. A lot of times you are just going to chain Cofagrigus, because that's really a just really powerful strategy, but sometimes you just can't get there with Cofagrigus, so we play this to help get around that. We then play 2 copies of Tapu Lele GX. Of course, it's wonderful Wonder Tag ability. Allows you to search your deck for a supporter when you play it from your hand onto your bench. Just a really, really good consistent ability. Find your supporters, use them. It's also got an attack energy drive, not terrible, you don't want to use it, but it is there. It does 20 damage for each energy test of both active Pokemon. And it's got a GX attack, Cure GX, if you want to use that. It's not terrible. We don't have any other GX attacks, so why not go ahead and use a GX attack, just for the heck of it. It does heal 2 of your bench Pokemon. Again, you're not going to use it that often, but potentially if you were against a spread deck, it could be a useful tool to remove damage from your field. Just to make sure you're not vulnerable to your opponent's Tapu Lele, though I haven't seen it used in this deck ever. Then we have, finally, 1 copy of Ditto. Ditto's really good. Allows you to evolve into any Stage 1 Pokemon. Since we play 2 different Stage 1s, it seems like a no-brainer to just play a Ditto, so we can evolve into both of them. I did actually play this Ditto in this deck even before I had the Malamar in here. My old version of the deck did not play Malamar, had a little bit more trouble getting energy into play, but it did play a more consistent build. But I found out that, you know, even without Malamar, Ditto's still good. You have the 5th Yamask, and what this deck just needs to do every turn is get a Cofagrigus into the active and hit. And having a 5th basic, even though you're not being able to evolve into anything else, is still really good. So, Ditto's pretty good to play. I absolutely love it. Then we have 4 copies of Lily. So, for our supporter line, 4 copies of Lily is really good. We just play the fastest and most consistent supporters in this deck. We don't really have the consistency of things like Zoroark to mess around with cards like Judge, mess around with cards like Kukui, and we definitely don't have the bulk to mess around with cards like Hasurola. So we're just playing the most consistent cards in the deck. Sadly, we can't play Elm's Lecture because Yamask has 70 HP, so there is a downside to having 70 HP, unfortunately, but Lily is still good. Allows you to draw until you have 6 cards in hand. If it's your first turn, draw until you have 8. Because you can play turns on the first turn of the game, you can actually go get a Tapu Lele and draw until 8 on your very first turn going first, which is really, really strong. It's also just good because you can thin your hand down with cards like Mysterious Treasure and Ultra Ball. And this deck is pretty good at thinning its hand down as long as you don't have too many recovery cards in your hand. Sticking with the consistency, we have 4 copies of Cynthia. Cynthia is just the best draw supporter in this format. Do have a nice Japanese one there. Shuffle your hand, you can draw 6. Very plain, very ordinary, but very powerful. We want to get as many cards as possible, and this is just the most consistent card to do so. I would definitely advocate playing this just 4-4 split in this deck. Again, you don't have the consistency to mess around with really other supporters, you don't have the bulk and that. One supporter count that is arguable is my 2 copies of Guzma. If you want to play a third Guzma, go ahead. I figured you can just fit 2 and that works fine. 2 copies of Guzma. Switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active, and then switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. So it gives you a free switch if you start a Giratina and you need to get out of it. There you go. And also, you just need to hit something on the bench because we're not usually going to be one-hit KOing too many things. They can hide on the bench so we can bring it back up and take a knockout. So it's a little bit light on the supporters in this deck. You'll notice that it plays a few less supporters than most decks. But we also play Marshadow for draw, Oricorio for energy consistency, and Tapu Lele to find those supporters. Multiple Tapu Lele, in fact. So this deck usually doesn't have problems with consistency as long as it doesn't get a just super bad opening hand, but every deck's vulnerable to that in the Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder format. Next up we have the item cards. Starting off, we have 4 copies of Nest Ball. Nest Ball is just a great card. Search your deck for a basic Pokemon and put it right onto your bench. It's getting a reprint in Scarlet Violet base. Pretty excited for that. This card is just really strong in this format, allowing you to get any basic out of the deck. In any deck that's not super reliant on using basic abilities, it's really good. Yes, this deck's reliant on using Giratina, but that's in the discard pile. And it's not a bad idea to just get a Giratina onto the bench with Nest Ball anyway, just so you can discard it and then get the effect going next turn. Nest Ball's really strong for obviously setting up your Yamasks and Cofagrigus, or getting the Yamask for the Cofagrigus rather, getting your Inkays, and you can even get things like the Prism Star. I will warn you that Malamar, Oricorio, and Lele are all play-down abilities, meaning that if you use Nest Ball to get them from the deck, you will not be able to use them. You can, however, use them then from the discard pile next turn. So it's really up to you how you want to use them. They are obviously good discard fodder just to give you more access to using them, similar to the way that you use a Versus Seeker to get access to a supporter after discarding it in the expanded format. It plays a similar way to that, if that's a good analogy for the expanded players round. Next up we have 4 copies of Mysterious Treasure. It's just the best search in the deck. Discard a card from your hand, then search your deck for a Lightning or Dragon Pokemon. You can see our whole line is essentially Lightning, or not, it's not Lightning or Dragon, it's Psychic or Dragon. I'm thinking of Storm Mountains. A Psychic or Dragon Pokemon. As you can see, our whole line is Psychic, so, you know, searching out Psychic Pokemon is pretty good. You can get everything in the deck but Ditto. Discarding a card from your hand is hardly of consequence. Early game, discard these Giratinas, super free. Late game, discard Pokemon that you know you can get back later. Super free. Then we have 3 copies of Ultra Ball, just rounding out the search support. Ultra Ball is really good. Discard 2 cards from your hand, search your deck for a Pokemon. It ultimately is more costly than Mysterious Treasure, which makes me stay away from 4 copies of it. I don't want this to be the main card I use to search things, but it is important to have 7 copies of these search supports. We want access to these playdown abilities like Tapu Lele, Marshadow, and Oricorio, and we also just want really good discard to get our Cofagrigus out of the deck. So 7 outs to Cofagrigus is pretty good. A total of 11 outs to things like Yamask, things that you want to chain every single turn, is pretty solid. Then we have 4 copies of Rescue Stretcher. This is like, what? Why are you playing 4 copies of Rescue Stretcher? All the people in the back are scratching their heads. Well, you remember when I said this deck works like a deck and expanded with Versus Seeker, and I wasn't lying about that. Rescue Stretcher is in fact the best card in the deck, other than the main attackers, of course. All of these playdown abilities we use, Tapu Lele, Marshadow, and Oricorio, can be retrieved with Rescue Stretcher after they are discarded. We will discard them to boost our attack damage, and at any point if we are struggling with our consistency, want to disrupt our opponent, need to find Guzma, etc., Rescue Stretcher comes to the rescue and gets us these Pokemon back. And also this deck is all about chaining. I've said this a few times now, but you really need to get Cofagrigus into play every single turn to be able to attack. There are a lot of turns where if you don't have any of these guys in hand, you might just double Rescue Stretcher for Yamask Cofagrigus from the discard pile. Put them back into play, and there you go. Get to choose one or shuffle 3. You're almost always going to use the first option to choose one. I've shuffled 3 maybe once or twice. You know, you get a lot of Yamask Cofagrigus knocked out because you just haven't been drawing your stretchers. You might shuffle 3 and then draw back into them. So really depends on you play it, but this is really the card that allows the deck to shine. I don't think you would play this deck with any less than 4 Rescue Stretcher because so many of these Pokemon are important. You need to be chaining these guys, and having these options to consistency at any point is what makes the deck as good as it is. Then we have 3 copies of Spell Tag. When one of your psychic Pokemon is knocked out from damage from an opponent's attack, put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. So this enhances our spread strategy of the deck. Giratina sets up numbers nicely on the bench, and then we can use Spell Tag to finish them off, Spell Tag to put attackers into range of our next Cofagrigus attack, and just generally put a lot of damage on your opponent's board, setting up for KOs in the future. You do need to be very good about how you place your damage counters with Giratina and Spell Tag. That's just something you'll learn from playing any spread deck though, so it's generally not too bad. Just really strong card, just absolutely worth playing 3 of. I did play 4 in my original list, I posted to Twitter, but after some testing I actually added another copy of the next card. We played 2 copies of Experience Share. When one of your Pokemon is knocked out, rather active, you get to attach an energy from that Pokemon to one of your benched Pokemon with the Experience Share attached. So, since we need 2 energy for the attack, sometimes our opponent will kill our Malamar. If we can't get that back into play in good succession, we're going to have to rely on good old EXP Share, just like we did back in the days of Black and White. So you have your Yamask on the bench with an EXP Share attached, it gets the energy, you attach another energy from hand, and now you're attacking with another Cofagrigus. Isn't that great? Yes it is, that's why I played 2 copies. I originally played 1 copy, but having 2 just ensures that even if you prize a copy of it, you're not going to be absolutely bankrupt in the game if you get stuck without it. Sometimes you can prize the 1/1 Malamar line as well, and then having 2 around is just really nice. Next up we have our stadiums, 3 copies of Shrine of Punishment. You may be saying, why not 4? You don't need 4. Every single deck in this format plays like 2 stadiums besides Shrine of Punishment decks, so you win the stadium race with 3 stadiums, right? Zoroark decks play like 2 Devoured Field. The Brooklet Hill decks, besides Buzzwole, play like 2 Brooklet Hill. You bump their 2 stadiums, and now your Shrine sticks for the rest of the game. And that Shrine's going to put a lot of damage into play. What it says is, between turns, put 1 damage counter on Pokemon GX and EX. You may say, oh, but that's threatening to our own Tapu Lele GX, is it not? No, it's not, because Cofagrigus will simply discard the Tapu Lele GX, removing your 2 prize liability from the field, and making sure it does not get damaged by Shrine of Punishment, while your opponent's Pokemon will be suffering from those damage counters. Lastly, we have the energy. 3 and 7. 7 total energy. So just psychic energies. Like I said, you could try out counter, but I wasn't a big fan of counter energy, because it's just hard to get going in the early game, and in the late game sometimes you go ahead on prizes for taking multiple knockouts with Giratina. It's a little bit messy. 7 copies of energy plays well. If you wanted to play 8, maybe cut the EXP Share for an 8th energy. Perfectly fine. I would not cut the Interrescue Treasures, or the Search, or the Supporters. I think the Pokemon lines are pretty good. Only cuttable thing was maybe Tapu Lele, just because you don't use it every single game, but I'm telling you, the games where you use it, it's the best card in the deck, really. As for this deck's matchups into the meta, obviously the biggest glaring flaw of this deck is that it has a bad matchup against Zoroark. Zoroark Weavile absolutely crushes this deck. Zoroark Decidueye Ninetales absolutely floors this deck. Zoroark Control just rolls this deck completely. Zoroark Lycanroc is a better matchup for you because it's just honestly a weaker deck, and you can survive a Lycanroc attack with your Cofagrigus, but it's still just pretty bad because it can just also roll a chain. Really, any Zoroark deck under the sun, Gyarados, Greninja, Glaceon, they're going to have a better matchup against this deck because they can just take 3-hit KOs. You have to hit them 3 times with your 100 damage. That goes to 80 after resistance. And they're not going to let you do that because they're just going to also roll and heal their Zoroark every single turn with minimal Pokemon in play, so you can't spread a lot of damage. And they're going to take a knockout with their Ridus Beating for only having 3 Pokemon in play. Times 2 weakness takes the knockout on Cofagrigus. Its Zoroark matchup is abhorrent, and that's why it was not meta back in the day. However, this deck is really good against everything else in the format besides Stall. This deck is absolutely incredible against Malamar. Its matchup against Malamar is super good because all you need to do is discard Giratinas over and over again, and after a couple turns, you will get several free prizes off of benched Malamars. Or, if you put this deck against, let's just say, Granbull, you will take several benched prizes against their Magcargos, Abstraikas, Orangaroos, things like that. You're just going to take benched prizes against them. And then Buzzwole. You hit weakness on Buzzwole. Lycanroc is not too threatening because it can't take 1-hit KOs on you, so Buzzrock is a really good matchup. If we look to other decks, Coco Simeon's another single prize deck. you're not worried about spread at all in that case, because their main attacker has to have a lot of Pokemon in play to hit you, and if they're spreading, you're just going to remove the Pokemon that are weak to the spread, so that's a super free matchup. Lost March, same thing, super low HP Pokemon, you're just going to take multiple prizes on them over the course of the game. You see a lot of free knockouts, especially with Spell Tag, really, really good. Meganium decks, you just spread to their bench Pokemon, their Swamperts and Meganiums, and eventually you'll take those out. Against Quagnag, you will one-hit KO Naganadels and severely hamper their Quagsires with damage counters on the bench. And finally, for one more matchup, I'll say Blacephalon is so free for this deck. Blacephalon is really, really good. You one-hit KO their Naganadels, meaning they can't use it as a good backup attacker, and you do that even only discarding 3 Pokemon in play, you still one-hit KO the Naganadel. You could even do 2, but 3 is obviously the best play for this deck to clear benched hazards. And against Blacephalon, it doesn't like lost zoning 3 energies to attack you, and it gets worn down super easily by a lot of Cofagrigus attacks, which is really, really strong. Like I said, this deck does horribly against Zoroark, but against every other deck in the meta that I can think of, besides Zoroark, and Gardevoir is like a little iffy because of the healing, it just offsets the single prize matchups with prize trades with Giratina damage counters, and against some of the other 2 prize decks like Buzzwole, it either hits weakness, or against Blacephalon, it just absolutely bodies the deck for having benched Pokemon, and for having to lose a lot of resources to take out repeated attacks. This deck is a lot of fun to play. Try it out maybe in your Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder Gauntlet. This is just an idea I was playing in 2018, and I enjoyed a lot in 2018. One of my favorite decks ever. If you love spread strategies, just a fun deck. If you love toolbox decks, this red shirt really gives a Versus Seekers vibe. Like I said, you get lots of cool Pokemon to reuse over and over. It's just a lot of fun to play. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, apologies for not having a retro tabletop gameplay up this Friday, but hopefully next Friday, maybe not, I might do another deck profile. No guarantees. We will get this sorted out, and I will get you more videos soon. Stay tuned to the Whimsicast, subscribe for more tier lists on Tuesdays, and eventually we'll get back to doing retro tabletop content on Fridays.